Howdy, it's Kyle talking about some places in the world that may or may not be countries depending on levels of recognition and which country you ask. So here I'll be taking a look at a handful of places that are of disputed status to see whether or not they actually are countries. Right now on Earth, there are a handful of military coups and different secessionist movements going on, and I won't be able to discuss every single situation like that on Earth, but I do want to go over just a handful of the type of disputed territories that are often discussed the most when talking about things like this, whether or not they're actually countries. With most of the viewers of the channel being either American or Canadian, I don't think the things I'm talking about in this video are going to be controversial to us, but I can see how if you're from that country or from somewhere nearby, some of the things I might be talking about might be a little bit controversial to you, but I'm not going to be getting into old history kind of things like thousands of years of old type history. So I'll talk about things in the past 40, 50 years, more recent history, but I'm not going to be touching on old wounds and old things that were going on several hundred years ago. So with that being said, let's take a look at a handful of places on Earth that have questionable status, and I'll give a little bit of an opinion on each one to see what I think might be the best, but let's see what some of these places are, whether or not they're countries. I'm going to start by talking about Kosovo. It's located in southeastern Europe in the Balkans region. It's officially still part of Serbia, and it was part of the former Yugoslavia before that. In the 90s, Yugoslavia dissolved and many of the republics became independent countries recognized by the UN. These included Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Macedonia, which is sometimes referred to as North Macedonia, but I'm not going to be getting into that in this video, but those other republics were declared independent and officially recognized by the UN. What was left over was still referred to as Yugoslavia and consisted of Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo, and eventually Montenegro gained independence as well, but Kosovo to this day still remains officially part of Serbia. The population of Kosovo is about 1.6 million, and the population is declining like most other areas in East Europe. If Kosovo were an independent country and became a member of the EU, it would be the poorest member of the EU. In terms of demographics, it's about 92% Albanian, most of whom are Muslim. There's also a small Bosnian and Turkish minority who are also mostly Muslim. About 4% of the population is Serbian, and about 6% of the population is Christian. Kosovo refers to itself as the Republic of Kosovo, and their official Declaration of Independence is from 2008. In terms of who recognizes Kosovo's independence, 54% of UN members do, including 82% of EU members, 88% of NATO, all 7 of the G7, 60% of the Organization of Islamic States, and 4 of the 10 Southeast Asian countries. There's a clear East-West divide in terms of recognition of Kosovo, again with Western Europe and NATO and the US and Canada. We all support Kosovo's independence, but Russia, China, and many other Eastern countries do not. And that brings me back to the East-West divide in terms of recognition, because what does China care about Kosovo? It has nothing to do with it in terms of history, so I think this is more of a lingering effects of the old Cold War, again, the old East versus West, dictators versus democracy kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, Serbia itself recognizes Kosovo passports and customs stamps, but Russia doesn't. And why Russia is so against Kosovo being an independent country is because Kosovo wants to join the EU and perhaps eventually NATO. So my overall take on Kosovo is I don't see any real reason why it shouldn't be recognized as an independent country, because if Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, and Macedonia can all be independent, why not Kosovo? The next disputed territory I want to talk about is North Cyprus. The island of Cyprus is located in the eastern Mediterranean. The population of the island as a whole is about 950,000 people, and it's officially divided up into 2 parts. You have the Republic of Cyprus, which is 2/3 of the island. The western, southwestern-ish part of the island is controlled by the Greek Cypriot population, and North Cyprus is the northern, northeastern third of the island, and that's controlled by the Turkish population, and it's referred to as the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. However, Turkey itself is the only country in the world that recognizes the Republic of Northern Cyprus, and the rest of the world officially recognizes the Greek Cypriot population as the sole government of Cyprus. In 1963, there were some large-scale skirmishes referred to as Bloody Christmas, and this started when there were Greek police firing on Turkish protesters. Hundreds were killed, and then eventually tens of thousands of Turks were forced into Turkish enclaves on the island. And then in 1974, the Turks retaliated and in turn displaced over 100,000 Greeks to different parts of the island. The UN created this border, and there was actually a large wall referred to as the Cyprus Wall, although it was demolished in 2008. But where you have the impasse is that the Turkish side wants two different countries. So they want a Greek country and a Turkish country. The Greek side wants the whole island to be united, but under Greek rule. And like I said before, basically the entire world, other than Turkey, does not recognize the Turkish part of the island as being independent. So we've always supported the Greek side, the overall just Republic of Cyprus. However, in a twist of fate, back in 2023, the Cyprus government was caught working with the Russian government well after the sanctions due to the Ukraine war. A big part of the Cyprus economy is Russian tourists going there on holiday to go to the beaches. So after sanctions, this was no longer allowed, but Cyprus was still letting Russians in and using some unofficial sources to funnel money, some money laundering type schemes with Russian money. Cyprus is a member of the EU, and once the EU kind of got wind of this, it became a big deal, as it should have been. Turkey is a member of NATO, a very important ally in terms of defense, and you have the Greek side of this island dealing with the Russian oligarchs' money laundering. With some of this new stuff coming out with Cyprus and Russia, some of the sanctions type things, again, that could change how the world views Cyprus versus North Cyprus, but we'll have to see. Next, I'm headed to Africa and Western Sahara. It's officially part of Morocco, and when you see a map of the country, there will often be a dashed line separating what is the main part of Morocco from the southern area, which is Western Sahara. And a group called the Polisario Front refers to the area as the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. And this is a rather large area. It's about 270,000 square kilometers. It's about the size of Italy or the U.S. state of Colorado. The population is around 600,000 people, and if it were an independent country, it would be the second less densely populated country on Earth. Of the almost 600,000 people that live there, almost half live in just the capital, which is Laayoune. The city was founded in 1938 by Spanish colonials, so this isn't one of those old Moroccan cities like Marrakesh or Fez. Up until 1975, the region was referred to as Spanish Sahara, but Spain gave up its claims to it and it became no man's land in 1975. There was a deal brokered between Spain, Morocco, and Mauritania to where this land that would be Western Sahara would be divided up between Morocco and Mauritania. However, only a couple of years after this deal, Mauritania abandoned its claims. The UN sat on it and nobody really did anything, but in the meantime, Moroccans were moving there. They largely moved to the capital, which is in the far northwest of this region, so to this day, the majority of the population in the city is Moroccan. The Sahrawi is the indigenous group of the region, and this is the group that wants to have an independent country for Western Sahara. The Polisario Front has said they want this new country to be a free market democracy, so people vote for their leaders. And therein lies the problem, because if it is actually going to be a democracy, because the majority of the population is Moroccan, in the very first election there'll be something that says, do you want to go back to Morocco? And most people will vote yes. So then what they're talking about is going back to the 1975 Spanish census, which was on paper to determine who can vote, with the idea being that only the indigenous population that was there before 1975 and their children will be allowed to vote, and the people that moved there from Morocco since then would not be able to. But that's a problem as well, because this happened again in 1975. That's before I was born. So if I were somebody that lived there, I was Moroccan, I'd be almost 50 years old not being able to vote to see where this country, the only place I know what their determination will be. But I think geography plays a huge role in why you have kind of an impasse here with recognition, and that you have one of the driest regions in the world. It's the largest area on Earth of just dry desert. There are individual small pockets of places that are drier, like Atacama and Namib, but the Sahara is just a giant desert. So the original indigenous population there, the Sahrawi, they were largely nomadic, so there really wasn't any homeland for them. There was no town, there was no large capital city. They largely moved with the seasons. So in more recent years, you've seen this group in the more modern times ditch the nomadic lifestyle, settle down more in cities, and they want a land of their own, and this is their homeland, even though there really weren't any large historic cities. But the biggest hurdle for Western Sahara and independence is going to come from countries like the US and France, who are very pro-Morocco. And there was a sketchy three-way deal worked out between the US, Morocco, and Israel that said if Morocco would officially recognize Israel, that Israel would not officially recognize Western Sahara. So I'm not sure exactly how this will go down. It seems like it's a bit of an impasse, but I'm going to go ahead and play God here. Here's what I would do. I would grant the two northernmost provinces of this region to Morocco. This is the smallest portion in terms of area, but where most of the people live, and those are predominantly Moroccan people. That would leave the southern 2/3 of the area to the indigenous group. Although there really are very few people in this part of the country, it would be the homeland for them. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen here, but I certainly hope it remains peaceful. There have been some violent flare-ups every now and then, but hopefully the situation will remain cool and calm, and maybe we get clearer heads and have a nice peaceful resolution of this. Next, I'm headed over to East Africa and Somaliland. This is approximately the northern third of the country of Somalia, which sits in the Horn of Africa. It has a population of somewhere around 6 million people, but it's unknown for sure. In terms of area, it's about the size of Czechia or South Carolina. To go over some of the more recent history of the past century, what is currently known as Somalia, the entire thing was once British Somaliland in the north and Italian Somaliland in the south. The British took Italian Somaliland by force during and right after World War I, and the British and Italian former Somaliland areas were united in 1960. However, civil war broke out in 1991 largely along the same colonial lines of British and Italian Somaliland, and what is referred to as Somaliland today drafted the Declaration of Independence in 1991. But most countries in the world do not recognize Somaliland. Many in the African Union and the European Union do, but most countries do not. And the Horn of Africa is a very unstable portion of the world. There are about 18 million people in Somalia as a whole, and both Somalia and Somaliland are equally as poor, but this is a really tough region right now in terms of war and political instability. However, its location is very strategic, being located right there on major shipping lanes, right across from Yemen in an area where there's a lot of piracy. But not just that, Somalia also houses large uranium deposits, so this is something that many countries in the world want to have access to, whether it be the US and EU or Russia and China. Something that potentially holds back recognition of Somaliland is that within the region there is another secessionist movement for Somalia in the region called Puntland. This is the region that's right at the point of the Horn of Africa itself, and it wants to break away from Somalia as a country as well, but it doesn't want to be part of Somaliland. By most accounts, Somaliland is relatively stable, especially compared to that region. So I just think that would be the part of the country that is officially recognized, and the part that is Somalia, the part that is Mogadishu as the capital, is the really messed up part that is having some issues with whether or not it's being recognized. With this part of the world being so politically volatile, and with powers that be on the earth fighting over this region for its shipping lanes and uranium, I don't see the situation in Somalia and Somaliland being rectified anytime soon. Okay, now I'm headed over to the Caucasus region because there's a lot going on over here. Several different countries that may or may not be recognized. The Caucasus are an east-west oriented mountain range that essentially connects the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea, and there are several small republics in this region, including 3 that are considered official independent countries, but this is also one of the dividing lines along with the Ural Mountains going north-south that kind of creates the divide between Europe and Asia. And the issues you're going to see in this part of the world are the same type of things, the whole east versus west. Most of the disputes center around the independent country of Georgia, which was one of the independent republics of the USSR. And then after the Soviet Union broke up, Georgia, along with Armenia, Azerbaijan, and many others, became independent countries. Georgia is relatively small. The population is under 4 million people, and it's declining. About 90% of the population there are Georgians themselves, but there are minorities of Armenians, Azerbaijanis, and Russians as well. So there are multiple secessionist movements within Georgia that the world does not recognize, but Russia does support, and Russia does want to see succeed. The first is Abkhazia, which is the northwestern portion of the country of Georgia. There are about 245,000 people there, and the area is a little bit smaller than Cyprus, but a little bit larger than the U.S. state of Delaware. The Abkhaz ethnically are the same people as Georgian. They're not different. They're just from a different part of the same country. But the Abkhaz people were loyal to the USSR and Russia even after Georgia became independent. So they wanted to break away from Georgia as a result. But Abkhazia wants to be an independent country. Russia is helping them, or at least wants them to succeed in that. But they really don't want Abkhazia to be independent. Russia wants to absorb Abkhazia back into itself. But perhaps the main obstacle for Abkhazia gaining recognition worldwide is that they were involved in a pretty violent campaign of genocide against Georgians. Thousands of Georgians were killed and hundreds of thousands were forcibly removed. The population dropped in the region from over 500,000 to just over 200,000 as a result of this campaign. But again, this keeps coming back to the same East versus West stuff. Georgia eventually wants to be a member of the EU and NATO, and certainly Russia does not want that. And Abkhazia has very close ties to Russia. They use the Russian ruble as their currency, and Russian is the co-official language of the region. Another movement within the country of Georgia is South Ossetia. The population here is about 40 to 50,000, although it is disputed, and essentially the exact same countries that recognize Abkhazia are the same few that recognize South Ossetia. So what I said about Abkhazia is essentially going to be the same for South Ossetia. During the time of the Soviet Union, this part of the country was more loyal to Moscow, and then when Georgia gained independence, this part of Georgia still remained more loyal to Russia. In 2008, the Russian military invaded Georgia and this part of the country, and 20,000 ethnic Georgians were forcibly removed. So Russia effectively had 250,000 Georgians removed from Abkhazia and 20,000 from South Ossetia. They're trying to ethnically cleanse these two regions. But just like Abkhazia, Russia doesn't want South Ossetia to be independent. They want to absorb it back into Russia. And the third one that I'm going to mention in this region is Chechnya. Now, this is actually a republic that is still part of Russia, but there has been a separatist movement in this region off and on for years. I'm not going to go into much detail with this one because there isn't really much dispute with this. Nobody recognizes Chechnya as an independent country, but I want to point this out because this is the same part of the world. This is that same Caucasus region that Russia has really kind of screwed up. So you had a lot of the Western European colonials screw up Africa. You've seen Russia with basic colonialism here kind of screw up the Caucasus. And that leads me to the next one I want to discuss, and that's Transnistria, a small north-south oriented strip between Moldova and Ukraine. And essentially what you have here is the same issues you've had in the other one. So Moldova wants to look west. It wants to join the EU and NATO. Ukraine also looks west. They want to join the EU and NATO. But this little strip here, Transnistria, does have a Russian plurality. So the majority, not the majority, but the plurality of people that live there are Russian. So they feel marginalized there and want to be closer to Moscow. So they want to be independent. But this is a tiny little strip of land, again, sandwiched between two countries that clearly look to the west and want to eventually be members of the EU and NATO. So this one, kind of like South Ossetia, I would say it can't be an independent country. It's just kind of a weird shape. It's in between two other countries that just don't align with it at all. So this is kind of a situation where the Russians either have to live there and accept being the minority, or if they just can't do that, then move to Russia. If this were a narrow strip of land right up against Russia, then maybe you can have an argument one way or the other. But again, with it being sandwiched between two other places, then I have to say no to Transnistria being an independent country. And again, another typical East versus West thing. Russia wants to hold on to something in the Western type world. This is a small little sliver, but it might be a sliver of hope for them. And the last one that I'll discuss in the video is Taiwan. And I know what you might be thinking, Kyle, how would you even dare question the validity of Taiwan as an independent country? Where's your CCP tattoo? And I'm sure the vast majority of people watching are like me. We want Taiwan to be an independent country, free to do whatever it wants, irrespective of what Beijing thinks, but that really isn't the case. Some basic stats. Taiwan has about 24 million people that live there, whereas mainland China has about 1.4 billion. The GDP per capita on Taiwan is about $70,000 US per year. It ranks between 15th and 30th on Earth for overall wealth, depending on the categories you use. Ranks in the top 25 for HDI. So Taiwan's a very wealthy country, whereas China is a middle income country, similar to Mexico or Russia in terms of its standard of living. What is referred to as Taiwan, they refer to themselves as the Republic of China, and mainland China refers to itself as the People's Republic of China. But what we refer to as Taiwan isn't just a single island. There are many other smaller islands as well, about 150 or so. In area, it's a little larger than Belgium, a little bit smaller than Maryland. But the reason why I'm even discussing Taiwan here is because there is a dubious status as to where it stands. China won't even go into official diplomatic relations or any type of discussions with any country that recognizes Taiwan, so very few countries do recognize Taiwan. So as a result, they can't actually be called Taiwan internationally. We all saw during the Olympics, they had to refer to themselves as Chinese Taipei because the world can't recognize them as an independent Taiwan. But one thing that's really interesting about this is Taiwan is not a breakaway province of China. So it isn't like Taiwan wants to be an independent country from China. I think there are plenty of people that want that, but I think there are many people that actually want Taiwan to reunite with China, be one large country, but if and only if China becomes a free market democracy. To many Taiwanese, Taiwan is the actual China, and the People's Republic, the big thing on the mainland, is the runaway rogue child, but the Republic of China, Taiwan, is the actual heir to the word China. Now, certainly Taiwan does operate as an independent country, although there never has been an official declaration of independence. They have their own elections, their own passport, their own currency, their own military. So it is its own country, and you can go there and visit and have a great time and not have to worry about the CCP watching every move. Now, I don't know if China actually has any real intention of ever invading Taiwan. I almost feel like they're using it as political leverage on a global scale to say, hey, we might invade Taiwan, so listen to what we're saying. And I'm hoping that's the way it is, that they wouldn't actually invade Taiwan militarily. That would be obviously quite bad. But the question for the video, is Taiwan a country? I mean, yes, it's a country, but it's also kind of walking on eggshells in terms of how we recognize it on Earth. So that was my overview of a handful of places on Earth that have disputed status. And of course, there's much more to the stories for all of these situations than just what I was able to go over in this video, just a few minutes for each one. But hope I was able to provide a little bit of info on some of these places you might hear about and whether or not they're actually countries depending on recognition. But if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography from a nerd. And if you'd like to see a nice map of some of these places I was discussing or many other places, you can check out Mirway Maps. They've been sponsoring some of my videos. Check out the link in the description for the video for a nice coupon code for a discount. But yeah, thanks for watching this video. Geography King, signing out. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially Adam H. Welcome to the family. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. As always, thank you very much.